this flight is my first solo cross-country, and I'm going to be flying basically the same route that Gene and I flew last week, but I'll be landing at 2 additional airports. Last week we flew straight back after we got to Scappoose, and I did hood work on the way back for about an hour straight. On this flight, I'll be hitting 2 additional airports on the way back up, and obviously not flying any simulated instrument. This camera, I think I must have had it mounted outside the plane for a previous flight, and that's why it's on medium wide, so that's why it zoomed in on my gut, and the audio was turned off, which is what I generally try to do if the camera's outside the airplane. So luckily I have 2 outside cameras, so I can switch to those frequently and not force you to stare at my gut the whole flight. But that's the deal with the interior camera. It should be on the widest angle of view normally when it's inside the cockpit, and that's on medium. So I'll just be doing voiceover. And I'm starting here, of course, at my home airport, which is Pierce County Airport. Used to be called Thun Field, and locals commonly still refer to it as Thun Field. There's the beautiful Mount Rainier to the southeast of the airport. And it's a beautiful day. And there's my flight from my iPad. That's the southbound first half of the flight, starting up in Tacoma, or Puyallup actually, at Thun Field, flying southwest to Chehalis, which is right between the 2 small towns of Centralia and Chehalis, then straight south to Kelso, then continuing south to Scappoose, just across the Puyallup, or the Columbia River into Oregon. And you'll see I'm taking off runway 35 here, and the wind is pretty consistently out of the north for this flight. So I land at all the runways headed back towards the north. That little thing on the wing there is the pitot tube. It's got a little flapper on it, and when you get moving fast enough, the wind just blows on it and pushes it open, so that when the plane sits on the ground, it's closed, so that bugs don't build a nest inside the pitot tube there and plug it up. That's how you get your airspeed, is through that pitot tube. Probably a French word. P-I-T-O-T. Swinging around to the south here, this is what's called the Downwind Leg. There's the airport over on the left, Pierce County Airport. And last week, if you watched that video, or a couple weeks ago, if you watched that video with Gene and me doing this cross-country together, I was veering too far off to the east, and we weren't sure what was going on, but figured out that I had accounted for, I always call it declination. That's what you call it on the ground. It's not deviation. But the difference between magnetic north and true north, it varies depending whether you're left or right of around Chicago down to Louisiana. That's where magnetic north and true north line up. So if you're east or west of that, you have to account for the difference. Because I was using the compass on this flight, and I've got that piece of paper there with my checkpoints noted on it, and the estimated time it should take me to fly between each pair of checkpoints. I'm using what's called pilotage and dead reckoning, where you use landmarks and a map and a stopwatch to navigate. And it turned out to be very difficult. It's much more difficult than I anticipated it would be. And since Gene's not with me, just as sort of a backup, I have my iPad with some aviation software and a VFR chart on it. So what I'm doing is trying to stick to the pilotage and dead reckoning navigation technique and just verifying that I am where I think I am then by looking at the iPad. But trying not to cheat. This is what a lot of Western Washington looks like. So you want to pick good landmarks for your checkpoints, which actually is pretty tricky. It's easy to miss checkpoints or not to be able to find them. And you don't want them too far apart, because if you're not flying quite the correct course, if you're off far enough, then you won't even see the checkpoint or the landmark. So I'm constantly looking out the windows, looking for my checkpoints. But definitely, I felt better about this one, since I had the correct magnetic heading. So I would just try to keep that lined up on the compass, and having already flown this once made it a little bit easier. And there I'm just banking the wing so I can get a look out the window down at the ground. The problem is if you fly directly over a checkpoint, you might not see it. So it's kind of nice to have it off to your left or off to your right so you can just look out the window and see what you're looking for. And I'm timing the distance and hoping for the time on my stopwatch, which I'm using on my phone there, to correspond to the estimated time that I wrote on that piece of paper. And if I get to the checkpoint early or late, I write that down on the piece of paper so I can try to adjust when I'll expect to be at the next checkpoint. Am I flying 10% fast, 20% slow? And I try to keep track of that so that I can be accurate in my estimation of when I'll get to the next checkpoint. So the wind could be different or whatnot, or I might have just done my estimations wrong. So as you go, you write down the fixed ETAs so that you'll do better with each checkpoint. All right, we're just coming out of the winter here, and so you can see some snow on the northern slopes of these low hills here. Not much, just a dusting. And these power lines, I'm probably following those on my chart. That's probably one of my landmarks that I'm using for navigation. Roads, rivers, power lines, different kinds of towers are all good to look for. Now, last week, Gene and I were looking for one landmark. Again, we were off because of my accounting for magnetic variation. That's the word I was looking for, incorrectly. But this week, I figured out what I was looking for. There are little TP-looking things on the VFR chart. Actually, a couple different styles, and they indicate different kinds of towers or tall structures on the ground. Could be a radio antenna, could be a smokestack, could be a variety of things. Could be a skyscraper, I suppose. And I discovered what the one was that I marked on the chart as my checkpoint. And I'm coming up on it here. You can see a couple puffs of, steam or smoke there just off to the right, up near the horizon. That is Centralia Big Hannaford Power Plant, and it's a major coal-fired power plant. And now they've also added natural gas-fired units. It's the only commercial coal-fired power plant in Washington, opened in 1972, and it produces just over 1.3 gigawatts, and that's just from the coal. And there's some additional power that it produces from the natural gas. And it used to get coal locally, I think, but now I think it only gets it from Montana, and it's gotten it from Wyoming in the past as well. So the smokestack, although it looks just like steam coming out of it, really, that was one of my check marks. And again, the chart doesn't say what it is, just that there's a tall thing there. And those indicators are all over VFR charts. Because like I said, it could be a variety of different things. Just something that's tall that you don't want to run into as a pilot. And you can see in front of the power station there is a giant pile of coal. And you get a better look at it here in a sec. But that's kind of neat. And maybe that's smoke, I don't know. But that's what I should have seen last week, but did not know it. Didn't find it. A little bit of turbulence there. Air moving around, blowing around a little bit, bumping the plane around. Now you can see the airport in the distance there, just off to the right, just below the hills in the distance, up near the horizon. It's just across I-5. Speaking of which, all the interstates in the U.S. have a pattern to them. The ones that run north-south use odd numbers and start with the smallest number on the west coast, I-5, and increase in number. So the numbers get larger as you go east. And the ones that run east-west have even numbers and start with smaller numbers in the south, like I-40, and get bigger as you go north. So in Washington, we have I-90 that runs east-west. So there's I-5, and you can see the airport there, Chehalis Airport, and Chehalis River, and that's the Riverside Golf Club. And this airport, its identifier is KCLS, if you want to look it up. And it's 5,000 by 140 feet. So it's good size, quite a lot bigger than Pierce County Airport. There's the Chehalis River. And it goes just a little bit south of town. Then I think it turns west, and then the Luscombe River peels off of it. And I'll follow that south of town just a little bit. Now what I'm doing here, or trying to do, is what's called a teardrop, and it's a way of entering the traffic pattern at an airport. And then you fly a 45-degree approach to the downwind leg, and you parallel the runway. But I'm doing a terrible job of it here. I didn't go far enough out, and I didn't go far enough back to the north. But that's something I'm not doing well at here at this stage in my flying, but that I will improve at. Beautiful golf course there. I don't play golf, but seems like it'd be a nice one to play at. So I should have been further to the north, further left. And I'm entering the pattern too far downstream here. And you want to enter the pattern at pattern altitude. So I'm going south here on the downwind leg. Again, remember the wind's coming out of the north, so I'll turn left base for runway 34 and then land to the north into the wind, because you want to land and take off with the slowest airspeed possible. Or the slowest ground speed possible. Your airspeed will always be about the same when you land, but you want to be rolling as slowly as you can. There's I-5. And there's the runway. I'm coming a little bit high, so I'm doing here what's called a forward slip. I'm kind of flying the plane sideways a little bit so I can lose some altitude without gaining too much speed or any excess speed. And now I'm straightening out. And I didn't have to do that. There's plenty of runway, but I like to try and land a little bit closer to the numbers. Not a little bounce there, but not too bad. Got a little to the right of the center line. Okay, now I'm intentionally moving off the center line to exit the runway. Resetting my stopwatch so it's ready to go for the next leg. And I'm not going to dilly-dally here at Chehalis at all. I'm just going to get back in the air and keep going. Once I get to the southernmost point of the day at Scappoose in Oregon, I'll get out of the plane and take a break for a few minutes. Okay, this is stupid. I'm looking at my paperwork while I'm taxiing, or my iPad. Okay, here's my approach. I'll get back to my last point there in a minute. I came in from the northwest, and you can see my teardrop over on the left side of the airport. It should have been a lot further to the north. And then I came around and landed from the south. And now I'm just taxiing back on the taxiway. I'll take off to the north, turn left crosswind, then left downwind, and depart the area straight to the south. Yeah, so I was looking at the iPad or paperwork in the cockpit while I was taxiing. Bad, bad, bad. Don't do that. Especially in a tail dragger, because it wanders all over creation, and you don't want to run into something. Keep your eyes outside the cockpit while you are taxiing. Focus outside, 100%. Checking to see if anyone's coming in on final there. And I would have announced that I'm taking off on the radio. It's called the CTAF. That's the frequency, Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. You let other planes and pilots in the area know what you're doing. And then each time you turn in the pattern, left crosswind, left base, you announce it. Unless you're at a towered airport, then you don't need to worry about any of that, which actually is kind of nice. The tower just clears you to land or to take off, and you just fly. Here I'm turning left crosswind. Now, a left pattern is a pattern where you make all your turns to the left, like I'm doing here. Right pattern is where you make turns to the right. Left is the default. If an airport has a right-hand pattern, it'll say RP on the chart next to the runway number. And at a towered airport, you fly whichever direction the tower tells you to. Could be left, could be right. It just depends on traffic and how he wants to have all the planes move around the area. Start my timer. I start it as soon as I'm just starting to head away from the airport there. Not when I'm on the ground, because it takes a couple minutes to get up in the air and get pointed the right direction. Always checking the map there, looking for my next checkpoint. And I took the chart, or the map, which is a pretty big, cumbersome thing, and I just cut out the piece that I needed for this flight. Much easier to handle. And I don't need any distractions or things that are difficult to mess around with in the cockpit. Now, underneath that piece of paper, I've got frequencies written down and notes about the airports where I'm landing, like if there's a right-hand pattern. Again, I wanted to note that since it's an exception to the rule. Just trying to make my job a little bit easier on this flight. Real low hills here. Off to the east, you've got the Cascade Mountains over out that window there. And those are generally, I think, around 6,000 feet or so. Then Mount Rainier goes up to 14,411. So it has quite the prominence. And I'm cruising about 100 miles an hour here. That's about the cruise speed of my airplane. 1946 Luscombe 8E. Supposed to stall at 48 miles an hour. And you're not supposed to ever go faster than, I think it's 145 miles an hour, which you can do in smooth air in a descent or dive. Power lines again, so I'm using those there to help keep track of where I am. Kind of interesting, you can see the different patches where they've cut trees down and where new ones are coming up. And I'm talking to myself there, pointing at things with my pen, looking for landmarks or checkpoints that I've got on the map. You can see there's a little bit of wind from the west here. You can see that smoke just off to the right of the power lines up ahead there. It's always good to keep an eye out for the direction that smoke is blowing, because if your engine quit and you needed to make an emergency landing, ideally you land going into the wind, and that means that your crash landing will be as slow as possible. It looks maybe just a tiny bit from the west, but definitely from the north. But not real strong. Right now, I'm doing a 360. No, I wasn't doing a 360 there. I was just looking out the window, taking a look for a checkpoint. I'm going to do a 360 here in a sec. Yep, there it is. Because I am supposed to be at a checkpoint, but I wasn't sure that I was there. I was looking for a tower or something tall, and I just wanted to make sure that I was there. But it was actually a pretty small tower, so I wasn't positive that I was at my checkpoint. So I'm just doing a 360, making sure that I actually found the checkpoint. And actually, you'll see an example of the symbol. Right there is the symbol. There's my 360, and there's the checkpoint. 255 feet above the ground. 595 for 6 feet MSL, so above sea level. So that was my checkpoint. So I found it. Now that is the Cowlitz River, I believe. It came in from the west of my flight path and empties out into the Columbia River, which you can see in the distance there. And there's the airport. This is Kelso, also called Southwest Washington Regional Airport. Its identifier is KKLS, if you want to look that up. 4,391 feet long by 100 feet. And what I'm going to do here, I'm above pattern altitude. I'm going to fly over the field and take a look at the windsock. And I'll use that to help determine which way that I'm going to land. Again, I want to land into the wind. Also, I have a horrible time visualizing in my head runway direction, how to approach an airport, how to enter the pattern. It's just super abstract and difficult for me to visualize. So flying over the field and looking at the windsock actually helps me with that. Lets me sort of digest what's happening and see very easily, based on the direction the windsock is pointing, which way is the best way to land. And while I'm flying around up above the field, I can figure out which way to fly to enter the pattern, either off to the left of the runway or the right of the runway, a couple miles, then do a teardrop and a pattern entry. So flying over the field above pattern altitude serves a couple different purposes for me. There's runway 12, so that's headed southish. Again, the wind's coming roughly from the north today, so there I'm transmitting. I'm pressing the button on my stick there, letting people in the vicinity know that I'm going to fly out to the west a little bit and do a teardrop to a 45 for left downwind for runway 30. And runway numbers, they're the magnetic direction divided by 10, plus or minus, I think, 5 degrees. So I'm going to land on runway 30. That's pointed 300 degrees approximately magnetic. There's the Columbia River. And I'm banking left here just for fun, just to get those grain silos or whatever they are in the picture. Lots of activity here. This is pretty cool. Train tracks, lots of industry going on here. bridge going across the Columbia. Lots of logs down there. So, the engine of capitalism. Lots of interesting stuff there. And again, that's the Cowlitz River. I think it comes from Rainier. There's a number of big rivers that come down from Rainier. Is there a Cowlitz Glacier? Maybe. Bunch of logs piled up down there. And there's the airport right ahead. And I'm on a 45. This is actually a pretty good pattern entry. I did a good job here. And then I'll turn right and enter the downwind, a left downwind. And I'll make that announcement. There I am, pressing that transmit button. And then I'll transmit when I turn left base and transmit again when I turn final. Lots of interesting colors down there. Oh, and there's a golf course here too, actually. The Three Rivers golf course. And you'll see that maybe a little better when I take off. And there I'm spinning the trim wheel. Full up, which still doesn't obviate the need for me to pull back on the stick when I land. Just not enough up trim on the Luscombe for some reason. And there's I-5 over there. And I think that's Mount St. Helens up on the horizon there in the distance. I'm turning final. And there's the runway. Runway 30. Doing a little slip here again, a little forward slip to shed a little altitude without gaining speed so I don't land quite so long. I'm giving it right rudder and left aileron, flying a little bit sideways there. Still slipping. Still slipping. And there I come out of it right there. Beautiful blacktop here. Gene commented on that a couple weeks ago when we did the dual cross country. Yeah, it looks like a pretty smooth landing there. Pretty close to the center line. And try to get in the habit of resetting the trim on rollout so it's ready to go when I take off. And I'm off the runway. And I'll make that announcement too when I'm clear of the runway. All right, there's my approach from the north, overflew the field, and it's not aligned perfectly with the map on the GPS, on the iPad. Overflew the field, then flew off to the left there, to the west, did a teardrop and a 45 to enter a downwind. Then I turned left base and final, and then I'll fly downwind after I take off and depart the pattern there to the south and continue south down to Scappoose. And yes, that's a funny name. Right across the river, the Columbia River in Oregon. And that's my southernmost airport that I'll go to on this trip. And write down my time of arrival. And again, that's totally stupid. I should not be doing that while I'm taxiing. Bad. Bad boy. And I'm rolling. There's runway 30 again. And I'm going to race this train. I think I'm about to catch him. I think I caught him. Or got up to his speed and probably get going faster than he is. I think some of those guys go 80. Actually, though, I'm probably going about 70, low 70 mile an hour range here. So it looks like I'm going a little faster than he is. And the golf course is off to the left there. That's the Three Rivers Golf Course. And I fly a little bit of a sloppy turn to downwind here just to point the nose of the airplane at that golf course a little bit. But I don't think there was another single plane around there, around that airport. And not too much at any airport that I flew at on this flight, surprisingly, because it was so nice out. Just not a busy day. Now I'm going to extend my turn here a little bit. There's that golf course. Very nice. There goes that train. All right, now I'm straightening out the way I should be going. Parallel to the runway. And this next part of the flight, the flight path takes me right along the Columbia River. So that's pretty easy to navigate. Pretty easy to follow the Columbia. And the Scappoose is just a little bit past the river, just a little bit off the river, not too far. So there's the Columbia. I'll fly. At this point, it runs north-south. So it runs east-west quite a lot for quite a ways before this. Then it turns to the north, then back to the west, and then flows out to the Pacific Ocean. So I'm flying south here along this stretch. And I'll cross over to the western bank and fly along that until I get closer to Scappoose, which is just a little bit to the west of that. You can see Hood Canal on the back of the map there. More, those grain elevators and some conveyor belts to load and offload ships there. Little island out in the middle of the river. It's kind of interesting. Tall trees there, so I think maybe it's been there a little while. One trip I'd like to make is to fly the entire length of the Columbia River. It enters the U.S. from Canada, so that'd be a fun trip. Probably an overnighter trip. Spend the night somewhere halfway along the river. And then after I get to the mouth, fly up the coast and then back inland. double checking with my iPad there, make sure I'm on track. Not sure there's a whole lot of landmarks along here, so just making sure I'm on the right track. And you can see a little bit of a clearing over these hills, in front of those hills on the horizon, and that's where the airport is. So just a couple miles more. And not too far off the river. Scappoose is, the identifier for it is KSPB. It's 5,100 feet by 100 feet. And it runs in approximately the same direction as all the other airports that I land at today, within a few degrees. Well, except for Toledo. I'll get to that later, but that one runs more east-west than the rest of these, which all run roughly north-south. Yeah, and in the distance there, it's a little bit brown right before the hills, and the airport's out there. Pretty crazy terrain there. All right, now I'm announcing that I think I'm probably announcing that I'm entering a 45 or approaching the airport on a 45. And you saw that turn there. That puts me on a 45-degree angle. And you can see the turn there. Come south and then hang a little bit of a right. That's the 45. And this is a right-hand pattern. You can see RP 33 at the lower right there. So it's a right-hand pattern to enter or to land on runway 33. So I'm making my turns to the right. After I enter the pattern on the 45, I'll turn right onto the crosswind, or the base leg. And if I stayed in the pattern and took off and landed again, I would turn right crosswind, right downwind, and then right base. There's the airport. So you can see I'm on a 45. And then I'll announce when I'm entering a right downwind. And I'm turning here. You can see I'm just about paralleling the runway there. So I'm on a right downwind. And then I'll turn right base. And I'll announce each of those things on the radio. Then when I turn right base, turn final, announce all of it. Although my base leg for this landing is more of a curved base leg rather than square, which is fine. Some pilots actually prefer a rounded base leg and a round crosswind leg. So there's nothing wrong with it. And as usual, I'm a little close, a little bit high. So you can tell I'm flying a little crooked there, so that's my usual slip to shed some altitude. But again, this airport's 5,100 feet long, so it's tons long. I got it pretty well in the center line there. Looked like a nice touchdown. And here, I'll take a break for maybe 15 minutes, get out, stretch my legs, eat an apple before I start the return journey to the north. Reset the trim. Again, nobody there, nobody flying, or very few planes. So surprisingly calm at all the airports on this day, which is fine with me. It's enough for me to think about. Not that it would be a big deal, but didn't bother me not having other planes around. Reset my timer. Get off the taxiway and just find a spot and park. No planes around there, so I can park wherever I want. Made it. Halfway. Woohoo! All right, took a break. Now heading back north. Now, at this point, so Gene and I did the hood work, but I'm going to land at 2 new airports. One of them will be the smallest runway I've ever landed at. That's the first one, Woodland State, and that's back across the Columbia River, just into Washington. W27 is its identifier, and it's 1,953 feet long by 25 feet wide. So that's kind of exciting. Again, more on don't be looking inside the plane. Don't be messing with that stuff. Look outside the plane. And it's sandwiched between the Lewis River, I think, and I-5. On a little strip of land. And it's an approach right over trees. So it's pretty exciting. That'll be the smallest strip I've landed at. 1953 by 25. And then the last strip I land at, well, I'll get to that later. Yeah, it's the Lewis River. So there's my trip north. I start out by heading a little bit northeast, or a little bit to the east of north, and then straight north up to South Lewis County or Toledo, goes by different names, and then northeasterly back up to Puyallup. So that's my trip home. Second half of the trip. Oh, and I guess I landed at 3 airports each way, right? Chehalis, Kelso, and Scappoose, and then Woodland, South Lewis County, and Thunfield. So 3 each direction. Hadn't thought of that. Alrighty, I am rolling. Tails coming up. Pull back a little bit, and the plane lifts off after I get up to speed. After the airfoil has enough airflow over it. Easy liftoff. And I'll just turn right about 45 degrees, 40 degrees, 35, 40 degrees, and head towards Woodland State Airport. There's a guy who manages Washington's state airports, and I talked to him on the phone before I flew in here to Woodland State Airport, just to get the lowdown and anything to look out for, any tips. He's a cool guy. I've talked to him a few times, and he responds quickly to emails and is pleasant to talk to on the phone. And he told me there was a guest book there, that I could sign, and I was planning on it, but the sun was getting low enough that I changed my mind and decided not to dilly-dally. So I stopped there for just a minute, and then pretty much right then decided I would just get back in the plane and continue on. Although Gene did sign me off for night flying, so it certainly wasn't a legal issue for me to fly at nighttime, but I just didn't want to dilly-dally too much. So I'm looking for my landmarks, flying my compass heading, which I had planned out ahead of time, and figured out what direction I needed to fly to get to Woodland State Airport. Looking down at my chart and for landmarks, maybe double checking things on the iPad there. So that's the Columbia, and that must be the Lewis River right there, straight off my nose, straight ahead of me. And the Lewis River flows just past the right side of the field, at least from the direction that I'm approaching, and I-5 is on the left side. You know, I don't think I followed the Lewis River as part of my navigation, but that actually would have been a good idea, I think. You don't need to just follow a straight line, and following a river could be a real easy way to navigate. Might have been an easier way to find the airport, because it's a small airport, not real obvious. And I don't think I followed the Lewis River. That was not part of my plan, but maybe it should have been. Almost looks like I'm going to, but I don't. You can see I'm pointed straight ahead there. So off to the west. I'll head off to the west of the Lewis River here as I go, which is the most direct, but maybe not the easiest or most confidence-inspiring. Beautiful evening light there, golden hour just about there. You can see the really long shadows cast by all the trees and bushes and so on. Now, straight off the nose there, you can see a little body of water that looks like a horseshoe, and that is called Horseshoe Lake, in fact. And it used to be part of the Lewis River until it was cut off in 1940 during the construction of Highway 99. And it's currently managed by the state for fishing trout and some other fish. And you can see it's a standalone horseshoe-shaped lake there, with I-5 right there next to it. And right next to I-5, in between I-5 and the river, is a strip of grass. That's the runway. That is Woodland State Airport, W-27. You can see the pavement over on the left side of it. The right side of it was just a bunch of grass, probably a few hundred yards before you get to the asphalt or blacktop, whatever it is. So there's the Lewis River, there's I-5, and I'm just overflying the field, taking a look at the windsock. figuring out which way I'm going to land. There's the Lewis River, and then off to the left there's the tip of the runway. So I'm just taking a look at the windsock or windsocks. There's usually a couple windsocks at each airport at different locations because the wind does different things at different locations on the airport. So I see the windsock, see which way it's going, and then head out a couple miles to do a teardrop to 45 for a left downwind for 3-2. Runway 3-2, 320 degrees. Here's the teardrop, and I fly the pattern too tight. I get too close to the airport and turn base too soon, and so I come in really high. And you'll see what happens. There's the teardrop. Now I straighten out to the 45, and there's the runway. But I don't even fly 45 because I'm too close. There's no time for 45, so I go from the teardrop straight onto the left downwind. And no one's around, so no harm done. But it's not the right way to do it. Not the best way to do it. At the very least, you'd want to be at pattern altitude, so you didn't come out of the teardrop on top of another plane that's on the downwind. There's Horseshoe Lake. Beautiful light as the sun sets over the Pacific off the western coast of the United States. Look at those long shadows. Really nice. So you can see the sun's getting pretty low. And the Lewis River, which goes under I-5. And that's the base leg, and I'm turning final now. And you'll see those fir trees right there, right next to the river? I should be down about even with those when I pass them. Actually, they should be above my wing, but you can see I'm way above them. So, way too high. So I'm going to do a little slip here, try to salvage my approach, and this is a narrow strip and it's a short strip, and at that point I retrim, I go full throttle, and I announce that I'm going to go around. Because 1953 by 25, landing long is just another thing that adds to the mix of it being a challenge and potentially dangerous when these things add up. So I just go around, and I'll fly a pattern, a left-hand pattern, and I'll come around and try again. And I make a point when I fly this pattern of flying a bigger pattern than I did the first time. I fly a wider pattern, so further away on my downwind leg. I fly the downwind leg farther, so I don't turn base as soon. Another mistake I made, a pilot called me on the radio right now and said, whoever's at Woodland State, you're on the wrong frequency. So I was on the Scappoose frequency, and so I'm looking at my piece of paper with my frequencies, and I'm just to verify it, and I get on the radio and I say, hey, thank you, and I switch frequencies. So that was a mistake on my solo cross country here. Now I make another announcement, which any planes in the vicinity that should hear it will hear. So I was making meaningless radio transmissions before. Now, if there's a plane that wants to come into Woodland, they will know that I'm actually in the pattern, whereas they would not have known before. So I'm on the downwind, farther away from the runway, and I make a point of flying farther on that downwind leg, both of which will help me come in lower, as I should be doing. At least that's the hope. really extending the downwind here. And turning my base leg later than I did the first time. And turning final. And you can see I'm much, much lower than I was before. And you'll be able to see those fir trees above my wing, off the right wing. So this was a really nice approach. I was really happy with this. And it was a kick. It was a blast flying low right next to these trees. That was so much fun. And I do a little slip here, still just to shed a little bit of altitude. Didn't do much of a slip, a little bit. That's it. And line up on the runway. Try to keep it centered. And even then, I didn't land short, but it was no problem. I think the Luscombe is supposed to be able to land within, 500 feet or something. So even if my landing wasn't very good, my approach wasn't good, shouldn't be a problem being slowed down by the halfway point on this runway. And I was going to get out here, or I did get out, and I was going to see if I could find that guest book and sign it, but then just got back in the plane to keep pressing on. So let's see, there's my approach from the lower left, overflew the field, did a teardrop, and then a really tight downwind leg. And then you can see I did a go around and went way out to the left for a wider downwind leg the second time around. And kind of came in closer as I went downwind, but still much wider and further downwind the second time. And made a good approach there. And you can see again how the GPS isn't perfectly overlapping the field, but that doesn't really matter. Start up my phone so I can use my stopwatch, although at this point it's getting pretty dark, or starting to get dark, and I don't really hit too many checkpoints from here on out. I use the compass at least, at least at the beginning here. But before I get home, it's completely dark. So I'm not using any checkpoints at all by the time I get back to Pierce County Airport. And I'm doing what's called back taxiing here. So I would say Woodland State traffic, Luscombe 1813 kilos, back taxiing on runway 32. So I'm going backwards on the runway that I'm going to take off on, and that's called back taxiing. And that's important because you don't want someone landing when you're on the runway. And when you say you're back taxiing, that lets other planes know that you are on the runway. And I'm still looking at stuff inside the plane while I'm taxiing. Stop it. Runway 32. They need to scrape that paint off and put the 2 on there again, because it's pretty terrible looking. But if you've done your research, you'll know which is which, but it'd still be nice to fix. Over the years, the magnetic North Pole moves, so they repaint runway numbers every so often when it changes enough. So that would have just been the old number. It would have been 3-1 or 3-0 or 3-3 or 3-4 or something like that. I don't know what it would be. Maybe I don't know, maybe a 4? I'm not sure. Anyway, so I'm rolling here, trying to keep the plane on the runway, 25 feet wide. Did a pretty good job there. And my biggest concern at this point is making it over those hills in front of me. I didn't know how difficult that would be. So that's on my mind. And of course, I don't need to keep flying straight ahead or fly into the mountains. If you're not going to make it, you just do a 360 or a couple of 360s and gain some altitude until you can make it. So it's not a big deal. But as it turns out, I easily was high enough by the time I got to them to get over the top. No problemo. So I'm climbing here probably at VX, or VY rather, which is your best rate of climb. So that's about 72 miles an hour. You'd use VX, which means your forward progress might not be great, but you can clear obstacles that are in front of you. And VY, you climb the highest over time. VX, you climb the highest per distance flown. And you can see in the distance there, Mount Adams probably, or Mount St. Helens, off to the east of me. Looks like the sun hasn't quite gone down below the horizon, but it's getting close. And the camera makes the sky look brighter than it really is because the ground is so dark. It causes the exposure to be greater. Just isn't enough dynamic range in these little action cams to salvage the exposure of a bright area. Yeah, and there's Mount St. Helens, I think, on the left, off the nose, and Mount Adams just over the nose there. Still trying to stick to it. Still trying to do my pilotage and dead reckoning. Flying my compass heading to get to the next airport. So Woodland State was the smallest runway I ever landed at, and now I'm headed towards an airport where I will do land at a new airport at nighttime. And I think it was darker than it actually will look in this video. It was pretty dark. And this airport goes by various names: Ed Carlson Memorial Field, South Lewis County Airport, and Toledo. And that's currently its symbol, or its identifier, KTDO. And it runs roughly east-west, or closer to east-west, runway 6 and runway 24. So 60 degrees and 240 degrees. Here I just did a 360 for fun, just to get that nice sunset in the video. There's the Columbia River in the background. And this field apparently was designed intentionally to be lined up crosswind for World War II pilots to practice their crosswind landings. That's what I heard. I don't know if it's true or not. It's 4,479 feet long by 150 feet wide. And I did land it there once, and the crosswinds were nuts. I didn't crash, but it was ugly. So this one will be totally in the dark. And I think I was getting tired because I totally screwed up the approach and the pattern entry. Terrible. I see that flashing light toward about, a fifth of the way down from the top, just off to the left. That's the rotating beacon. It flashes alternating white and green. One white, one green, one white, one green. It was a little tricky, but I did find it. Did find the airport. Did identify it via that beacon. And I tuned the radio to the CTAF, the Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. You click the mic 5 times, that turns on the runway lights. Then you can click it 3 times, 5 times, or 7 times at that point to adjust its intensity. 3 for the lowest intensity, 7 for the highest intensity. And actually some of them you click 7 times to turn them on. There are a couple different kinds of lighting, and you click either 5 or 7 times. And you can always adjust the intensity by clicking 3, 5, or 7 times then after that. So I announced that I'm entering a left downwind for, it would have been 2-4, but I'm actually on a 45 for a right downwind for 2-4. And the truth is, there were no planes around. Nobody announced anything. There was no one flying because it was getting pretty dark, and most general aviation pilots don't fly at night. So I honestly could have just continued that approach, make a radio call saying what I was actually doing once I realized it. But I'm inexperienced, so I didn't even think of that. And I probably could have I could have done a few different things at that point, which would be simpler. But I announced what I did wrong, went full power, so I could climb above pattern altitude, across midfield to do a teardrop for a 45 for what would really be a left downwind for 2-4. But I didn't go far enough. My teardrop was too tight. My pattern was too close. I turned base too soon, so I came in high. Story of my life. So I turned on that teardrop too soon. Need to be patient. Just fly further. Another couple miles. It'll just take another couple minutes. But see how close I am to the runway? I come out of the teardrop right into the downwind. So there I just keep turning onto the downwind. But I'm still too close. Even though I didn't fly a 45 at all, I'm still too close. So I just keep turning there. And then I turned base too soon. Well, I overshot final. You'll see here. So yeah, I'm turning base too soon here, and I'm too close to the runway on the downwind leg, so I overshoot final, meaning I fly beyond the runway center line. So I'm turning a little bit tighter there to come back to the center line. You'll see here. See that? I flew past it. So now I'm getting back over to it. Not the end of the world, but I was too high to begin with. I'm super high. So what do? I do my second go-around of the trip. And I should have done what I did at Woodland State, which is now to fly a wider pattern and a longer downwind leg. But this one's just about as bad. Too tight and not a long enough downwind. So not ideal, not perfect. That's litotes. That's understatement to make a point. It's kind of the opposite of hyperbole to say not perfect here. It was terrible. Got my headlamp on there so I can see my instruments. And actually I switch it over to red LEDs here. I guess probably when I'm on the ground here at Toledo. So now I'm turning too close a downwind leg. Turning base. But I was too close to the runway on the downwind, so now I'm overshooting final again. So not great. But I bring it back into the center line, and my altitude is a little better this time. Do a little slip to lose some altitude. And I salvage this approach. There's the threshold. That's called a displaced threshold, meaning you can't land to the very end of the runway because of obstacles or a road or trees. So that's not a great landing, a little bouncing there. But at this point in the trip, I can live with that. So that was Mount St. Helens, and I think that's Mount Rainier, straight ahead there, on the horizon. Or is that smoke? I don't know. Yeah, I don't think that's Mount Rainier. All right, head back along the taxiway to the end of the runway, and let's get going here for the final leg of my first solo cross country. I replaced my wingtip lights with nice new fancy LED units so that I could use the Luscombe for my night training, because I wanted to use the Luscombe for the whole ball of wax. And I replaced the landing lights with LED units as well, which are very, very nice. And You can see they're illuminating the ground in front of me nicely. The incandescent ones it had on it when I bought it were just completely and utterly worthless. So these new ones are nice. And the wingtip nav lights, they're combination nav light and strobes. So with the strobes, I can do my night training in the Luscombe. Yeah, you can see those landing lights. They're great. Very, very nice. Dramatic difference. From worthless to excellent. There's the displaced threshold, but I can take off starting within the displaced threshold all the way to the end of the runway. You just can't land before the displaced threshold. Or you're not supposed to anyway. So yeah, those landing lights are great. You can see them even after I'm quite a ways away from the ground. And I'm off and running. Now at this point, my instructor was really starting to worry. I should have been texting him when I landed at the different airports, but we didn't discuss that ahead of time. And he was getting worried. Little did he know, I was just putting along, having a good time. In the dark, over the mountains. So that caused him extra concern, flying over these mountains in the dark. So he was relieved when I notified him that I was alive after I got back to Thunfield. Now I've got the red LEDs on, so you don't wreck your night vision quite so much that way. But it's adequate for me to see my instruments. And at this point, I wasn't using checkpoints. I was just 100% iPad. So the headlamp wasn't for reading the map, the paper map, or looking at my flight plan, my checkpoints. It was for looking at my instruments, airspeed. Probably one of the most important ones. Altitude, that's a critical one. Because I wanted to shoot for, I don't know, maybe 5,500 feet to give myself plenty of altitude over these hills. So I really needed to see a couple instruments. RPM, that's important. Oil pressure. So a few really important instruments that I wanted to keep an eye on. Not for navigation so much. All right, now I'm over the foothills, and I'm looking at a lot of the lights of Puyallup there. Still out in kind of some rural area here, but off to the left, which is north of me, is a lot of the lights of the city of Puyallup, and then Tacoma beyond that. So I'm on a 45 here. Well, not a 45. I turn sort of at a 45-degree angle to get over to the east a little bit and intercept the extended runway center line. And then I fly, see that 45 there at the bottom? To get over on the extended runway center line, and then I fly straight in all the way until I land on runway 35, headed pretty much due north. And you do that, or you can do that, if there's not a lot of traffic in the pattern, if it's not busy. If there's traffic in the pattern at an airport, they have the right of way. So you can't just fly straight in and land. You need to enter the pattern, with the other traffic, and then you come in for the landing. So that's, is that Meridian? I think it's Meridian. Busy street there that comes down from Puyallup. And Pierce County Airport is just a block off of that street. You can see the flashing lights there straight in front of me. That's the airport. And this is sped up. I'm not flying this fast, but I sped up the footage because you've already been sitting here a long time. So I think I've got it going at 400% here. Or maybe it was 200%. Anyway, so I'm on final approach for runway 35 at Pierce County Airport, and it's pretty dark. And I think that's regular speed there. But I'm feeling pretty good here about having accomplished my first solo cross-country, including landing at the smallest airport or the smallest runway I've ever landed at, and a new airport at nighttime. So it was a pretty good trip. I did not do too badly. Did pretty well. I think airport lights look neat. They look beautiful. And 4 reds on the right, that means I'm a little bit low. But I'm familiar with this airport. I know there aren't any obstructions there, so my approach actually was a pretty good angle, I think. And you can see my landing lights illuminating the ground in front of me pretty well. And I'm safe on the ground back at my home airport. And I started out with about 3.5 hours of video footage and got it down to about an hour and a half, so that tells you how much I cut out. And I'm off the runway. Whew, I made it. So once I stopped the plane, I see that Gene has texted me, I don't know, probably a couple times. So I replied with a lengthy text describing my flight. Or no, I got out of the plane, typed up a lengthy text to send Gene to let him know how the flight went, what happened, that I was back safe. And then I sent it, and then I saw that he had texted me a few times and was worried. So I called him right away and just described the trip to him. And he was real happy that it went well. And I'm happy at how it went. So even though it wasn't perfect, it went pretty well, and I learned things and realized I needed to work on a bunch of different things, or learn specifically what those were. So that's it. I'm home safe.